Welcome to the third FRB Farmer Forum webinar. My name is Sierra McDonald, and I am the product manager here at Front Range Biosciences, and I will also be the moderator for today's event. So thank you everyone for joining. V, can you go to the next slide, please? Today we are going to discuss all you need to know about planting hemp seeds. We're going to review direct sowing techniques, seed germination techniques, and field transplanting. At the end, we'll have a discussion for Q&A. Next slide, please. Okay, so who are we? For those of you that don't know us, Front Range Biosciences is a premier hemp genetics company. We focus on creating new genetics that are field tested and farmer approved. We have a large variety of proprietary hemp cultivars featuring unique cannabinoids and high terpenes. All of our varieties have also been verified through genomic markers, true to type testing, and they've also been field tested by farmers in over 22 regions of the United States. Our headquarters are located in Boulder, Colorado. We have a tissue culture lab in Erie, Colorado. Our breeding facilities are also here in Boulder and in Barcelona, Spain. We have 2 greenhouses in Lafayette and Denver. And we have some breeding partners all across the United States in Georgia, California, Florida, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Colorado. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's meet today's panelists. First, we have Meagan Coneybeer. Meagan is FRB's technical agronomist and our Eastern Region sales specialist. Meagan is currently pursuing her PhD at North Carolina State University, and she is studying alternative crops and organics with a focus on hemp. Next up, we have Fallon. Fallon studied agriculture sciences at Cornell University. She has worked as a head grower producing leafy greens and herbs in Pennsylvania and Illinois. And she now manages our FRB greenhouse operation, where we produce all of our vegetative material, seed production, and as well flower production. So welcome, Fallon. All right, so let's get this kicked off. If you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, please post them in the chat, and we will answer them at the end during our Q&A section. We also have some handouts in the handout section. We have our planting and receiving guidelines, farming recommendations, and our product catalog for you to view and download. So be sure to check that out. All right, Meagan, I will hand it off to you. And thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoy.
Thanks, Sarah. V, go ahead and advance the slide, please. So today we're going to talk to you guys about utilizing seed in your hemp production, and we're going to cover direct sowing and transplanting, as well as starting your own seed for the purposes of creating seedlings for transplant. So our first method we're going to talk about today is direct sowing. This is really popular for growers who are transitioning from another commercial agricultural system into hemp production. In the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic, we have a lot of tobacco growers that are working with direct sow and trying to repurpose that type of equipment. We also have in the Midwest and Upper Midwest a lot of large-scale grain growers that are using direct sow as a methodology. With direct sow, you need to plant after the last frost and make sure you leave yourself enough time to give each variety 11 to 12 weeks of veg time from seeding. Normally, the veg time recommendations that you see in our catalog are in reference to the date from transplant, not the date from direct seeding. And so you'll need to add 4 to 5 weeks on to the recommended amount of veg time if you're going to direct seed in the field. So for instance, we recommend a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks in the field. You'll be looking at 11 to 12 weeks minimum veg time if you're going to direct seed. Really common planting methods for direct sowing are, what we see in other agricultural industries, a grain drill. And with a grain drill, you can actually cover some of the openings inside the grain bin so that you're only using every other drop or every third drop, so you're not seeding at the same density that you would for wheat or fiber hemp. Hand planting is also very labor intensive, but very common. It's inexpensive, does not require special equipment, and you don't have to retool or buy anything new in order to do that. Mechanical seeders can also be used. Corn seeders, you can repurpose bean plates or corn plates depending on the type of spacing that you're trying to achieve. They don't really make a hemp plate, so you're going to have to do some trial and error to match the size of the seed hole or the little seed cup on your seeding plates with the hemp seed, and find one with an appropriate plate size as well as spacing. Planting methods, the biggest issue is the spacing consideration. We're looking at 3 to 5 feet in the row, and that's really hard to achieve with a lot of hand or a lot of traditional direct sowing mechanisms. Like I mentioned before, you can cover the holes in the grain drills to create spacing between the rows, but it's harder to create spacing within the row. Common methods are blocking the holes in seed plates. And so, for instance, if you normally have 8 holes in a seed plate, you may only allow 1 hole to collect a seed. This is why hand planting becomes so popular, because you can really just go into the field and plant seeds every 4 to 5 feet for their larger varieties, and 3 feet for smaller, more upright varieties. Standard planting methods apply. Soil should be moist. Your seeds need to be completely covered, and soil temperatures will ideally be above 60 to 65 degrees in order to get adequate germination. Go ahead and advance, Fee. So the biggest benefit to direct sowing is cost saving. You're not paying a company extra money for clones or seedlings. You're not paying a greenhouse extra money to propagate for you and create your seedlings. And so you are saving a lot of money on the front end. But there are more risks with direct sow, and the risks tend to outweigh the benefits. One of the biggest issues is pest pressure. Weed species tend to grow very quickly, and those little tiny hemp seedlings that are germinating in the soil struggle to keep up and struggle to compete. And so if you're not doing very vigorous weed management in the field, you run into excessive pest pressure. Animals and other birds like to eat the seeds out of the field. Small plants tend to be damaged by increased insect pressure at that vulnerable time period. And so you really have to watch out for that. Poor germination is another issue. If you look at seed density recommendations in our catalogs, we recommend anywhere from 1,700 to 2,500 plants per acre. And if you only seed 2,500 plants and then experience an issue with germination, you're not going to have the stand counts that are recommended for appropriate spacing and appropriate numbers per acre. And so poor germination is another consideration. One of the biggest challenges across the country that I think at least all of us on the East Coast are experiencing right now are cool temperatures. We were in spring and now we are back to winter. We were in the 30s here, I'm in North Carolina, 30s in North Carolina last night. I know the Northeast is in the 20s. And so if you've already planted outdoors or direct seeded at this point, you're looking at the potential for a lot of loss due to freezing, and that would be very unfortunate. And a lot of growers try to get their seeds in the field early to try to get a jump on that germination. With those cool temperatures or unpredictable spring temperatures comes the risk of not enough veg time. If the seeds sit in the ground, it takes them several weeks to germinate due to cool temperatures, you're running the risk of not giving your plants enough time to grow large enough before flowers induced. And research tells us, and this is peer-reviewed research from the university systems, tell us that overall direct sowing results in less overall biomass production. And so the plants experience more competition, more insect pressure, more weed pressure as they're developing, and they overall don't get as large toward the end of the season, and you end up with less biomass overall, which is less yield if you're growing for extraction. Go ahead to the next slide, V, and Fallon is going to take over for us and talk to you guys about starting indoors and creating seedlings for transplant. Go ahead, Fallon.
Hey everybody, so yeah, starting seedlings indoors. So as Megan just stated, there are a lot of benefits to starting your seedlings indoors and then transplanting. So there's some considerations here. First is your cell size on the trays that you're using. We here at FRB use 72 cell deep trays. Those tend to be really nice because they have proper root ball size. So that's where the deep tray is a benefit. You get a deeper root system to benefit the plants to get a good start when they're transplanted. Going on to like a 98 cell tray, that's another good option. It's not too much bigger or not too much smaller than the 72 cell. I would not go as large as a 50 cell, however. You run into issues there with dry down. So you definitely want to make sure that your plants aren't just saturated in the soil, and if there's too much soil, they'll stay too wet. Same goes for the other direction. So when your cell size gets too small, like a 198, then your plants are drying down too much, and they might not be able to handle the stress in the field. They also won't have as large of a root ball. Moving on to media. So the ideal seedling mixture contains a mixture of peat, fine vermiculite, and fine perlite. So you definitely want to have a fine texture here. You want to increase the seed to soil contact as much as possible. LE pots or bound medias are also a great option. This will reduce your time to transplant. So when you have something like a paper pot, like an LE pot, or some Jiffy plugs are like this as well, where they're bound, that can mean that you can pull out the root ball sooner. So in a loose fill tray, you're going to have to let those roots grow for longer in order to fully fill out the tray. With a paper pot, you can pull it out sooner, and that reduces your time to transplant. It also reduces the risks of basically pulling the seedling out of the soil and breaking the root ball off of the stem. Bottom heat. While bottom heat is helpful and will speed up the germination process, it's not essential for seedlings, as it is more essential for rooting clones. Next slide. And one more note on the bottom heat as well, just making sure ambient temperatures are 70 to 80 degrees. That'll make sure that your soil stays warm enough to germinate without bottom heat. Watering. So after you're sowing your seed, you want to water in the trays with vegetative feed. This could be any sort of CalMag mix, and you want the nitrogen to be about 100 to 200 parts per million. In between waterings, make sure you allow the cells to dry down. This is really important with hemp. Hemp really likes like a wet-dry cycle. So you want to make sure that the roots are drying down in between. That prevents any sort of root rot or other pathogens in the roots. Light. So you want to allow your seeds to germinate in a shady area, but as soon as the radicle comes out, make sure you move it to the sun right away. This will prevent stretching. If it stays shady for too long, it gets stretchy in between the radicle and the first true leaves, and that will cause some weakness when you transplant, and you won't have as much strength in your seedlings. Next slide. Cool, and I think this goes back to Meagan.
Thanks, Fallon. So when we're talking about transplanting seedlings, that's the process of taking them from the trays, from the greenhouse, and getting them out into the field. And preparing for transplant for seedlings is exactly what you do normally in the spring when you're getting ready to grow hemp, whether it's from clones or seedlings. You prepare your fields by plowing, disking, and tilling if you're following traditional methods. You test your soil for soil nutrition. You test your water to make sure irrigation chemistry is balanced. And then you also develop a fertigation plan and soil amendments based on the results of those water and soil tests. One of the important things to remember about transplanting is that these guys, or I should say ladies, since they're most likely all female, if you're doing hemp for smokable flour and biomass, they don't like to sit in water. And so your irrigation plan and fertigation plan is going to be very, very important. Traditionally, drip irrigation is recommended. Drip irrigation reduces water loss, it reduces evaporation, it allows you to deliver fertilizers quickly and efficiently through fertigation, and it also reduces wetness on the surface of the leaves, which overall makes disease pressure much less of an issue throughout the season. Particularly once you're in flower, you really don't want to have any moisture hanging out in your colas and on your plants because it causes your colas to mold. And when you start to get some mold, insects move in, secondary diseases move in, and we get caterpillar issues severely. So, drip irrigation overall is the preferred method. If you're looking at overhead irrigation as your only option, it's much more viable during veg when you don't have flowers on the plants. And as you move into flower, you may need to reconsider how you irrigate or the timing of irrigation during the day based on the amount of sun exposure and things like that to increase drying so that you're not dealing with wet plants sitting in the field overnight or wet plants sitting for days on end due to overcast or cool temperatures. Go ahead, Bea. So when you receive your plants as seedlings or when they're ready to be moved from the greenhouse outdoors, you want to unload and unpackage them if they're coming to you in shipments and store them in filtered direct light. So what we mean by filtered direct light is you don't want to bake them in the sun, but you don't want them to be in darkness either. They are photoperiod sensitive, and if you artificially shorten the days by storing them in the shade or under a carport or under a barn awning, you're going to end up messing with their photoperiod a little bit, and you could cause them to trigger flowering early, and that creates issues. You want to inspect your plants for damage, check for loose or missing plugs, so plants that either didn't germinate or plugs that may have fallen out during shipment. And you need to plant within 3 days of arrival if your seedlings are being shipped to you. They're designed to be held for a short period of time, but normally when plants are shipped as seedlings, they're being shipped to you at the ideal time for transplant. And so if you do plan to hold them, you're going to have to water them daily to complete saturation. Make sure that you don't mess with the photoperiod too much by giving them too much shade, and get them in the field as quickly as you can. But we all know in ag that is sometimes difficult to do. There are production issues, there are weather issues, and so just do your best to treat them as nicely as you can until you can get them in the field. Go ahead, Veronica. Fallon's going to go ahead and are we on 11? I'm sorry, I've lost track of slide numbers. Fallon, do you take back over here?
I think this is you.
Okay, thanks. So when we're talking about getting the seedlings out of the trays, this is the crucial period of being very, very kind to your plants. You never want to remove plants from the trays by pulling on the stems. They make fancy little tools like a plug popper. Honestly, I like a pocket knife. They slide down into the plugs, and you can use them like a spatula and kind of press the whole root ball against the side of the plug and pull the whole root ball out, like using the pocket knife as a spatula. Wooden plant tags or popsicle sticks also work really well. I've seen people try to pop them up through the bottoms of the plugs, like through the holes in the bottom of the trays. It normally doesn't work. It creates a mess. So the spatula method is my preferred method of choice. Pocket knife, popsicle stick, butter knife, anything like that that's flat and not too large for the plug holes. When you're planting, the goal is to cover the root ball completely. And so whether you're using a mechanical transplanter or transplanting by hand, you want to make sure that somebody is running quality control and walking behind the transplanter or the people planting to make sure that the root balls are completely covered and that there's no visible media from the tray hanging out above the soil. If you allow that soil media that they ship in and are started in to stay exposed, it dries out really quickly and it increases the risk of killing your little seedling. It's really important to water in after transplant. I like to do this with a seaweed water solution like a 0017. There are many brands, Nature Nog, Maxi Crop, pick your choice, but I prefer Maxi Crop personally, and I water in using that seaweed solution. Once the seedlings are watered in, you want to establish a watering schedule based on a soil moisture meter being inserted into the soil. You need to allow the water in the soil to drop down in the 1, 2, or 3 range before you water again. You don't want to necessarily keep your plants in the green. Just like Fallon mentioned in the previous slides, they do like a wet dry cycle, and they do not mind being dry for a couple days. Hemp does not like to sit in wet soil, and so if you're getting excessive rain, don't water. They're just going to have to wait. And this does pose an issue with irrigation and fertigation, particularly because if the soil is constantly saturated, it's harder to get the plants to take things up through fertigation. So you may have to revert to a granular feeding regime during the season if soil water becomes an issue. Go ahead, Bea. So when you're transplanting seedlings, the benefits far outweigh the risks here. You have a known stand count. You're able to look in the trays, count the number of plants that you have, and plant the correct number of plants per acre in the appropriate spacing. It's much easier to mechanize this process, particularly with plastic mulch. They make transplanters that can punch holes and put the seedlings in at the same time. In a large field situation, a mechanical transplanter similar to what you would use for a sweet potato slip can be repurposed for hemp seedlings if they're not too tall. So there's a much easier mechanization and retooling of mechanized transplanters from other industries. You don't really need to wait for the soil to warm. Companies don't ship these things before time if they're doing a good job. And so ordering from us, we check with you to see where your photo period is, when your frost begins and ends in the season, and we ship appropriately. And if you're doing your own seedlings, you can start them in the greenhouse at the time you would normally direct seed and then transplant them outdoors when the soil warms up. It's much easier to get full veg time with seedlings because you plant them appropriately when it's already warm. You're not dealing with the other challenges and risks of poor germination. And research again shows us that there's an increased amount of biomass produced during the season from seedlings. And so your yield statistically will be higher at the end of the year. And there's also less weed competition. If you're using plastic and planting directly into the plastic, obviously the plastic acts as a weed suppressor. But if you're preparing a field, disking and tilling and plowing, and the soil is bare and you're planting these started plants, they have a several weeks jump on the weed seeds they're going to have to germinate, and it gives them that competitive advantage. The biggest risk to seedlings is a higher initial cost. If you're purchasing them from FRB, we have to upcharge you a little bit beyond the cost of the seed for our cost to germinate them and start them in the greenhouse and ship them. If you're starting them yourself, you're investing in the media, the trays, the seeds, fertilizer, lights, greenhouse heat, and all of that stuff can add up. And so there is a higher initial cost to seedlings. Go ahead, Bea. So that's what we have for you today. For those of you attending, there's a place on your screen to the right where you can ask questions and type those into the little question drop down. And we'll answer them for you here. We also have a series of handouts to the right. There are 3 farming recommendations, our 2021 catalog, and then directions for how to plant once you receive your plants. If you have questions that come to mind after the session today, feel free to email us at sales@frontrangebio, and we'll forward your questions to the appropriate staff member. We thank you for your time today and appreciate you spending your Thursday afternoon with us. That's all we've got for you.